You may think the worst thing you can do to your sweet pepper plants during a heat wave is forget to water them, but after all these years in the garden, I can tell you that is not the mistake that ruins most harvests. The real problem is that people panic when the temperature climbs and they start doing things that make healthy plants weaker instead of stronger. I have watched beautiful pepper plants covered with flowers suddenly stop growing, drop their blossoms, and struggle for weeks simply because someone believed more water in the middle of a blazing afternoon would solve everything. Then they wonder why the fruits stay small or never develop at all. I used to make the same mistake many years ago until an older gardener quietly showed me something so simple that I have never forgotten it. Since then, my peppers have handled hot summers much better, and they keep producing when many nearby gardens slow down. If you have ever walked outside after several days of intense heat and felt disappointed because your pepper plants looked tired, even though you watered them every day, then stay with me, because I want to show you exactly what changed everything for me. None of these methods are expensive, and most of them cost almost nothing because they rely on simple habits that many people stopped using years ago. By the end of this video, you will understand why peppers suffer during extreme heat even when the soil looks wet, and you will know how to help your plants keep setting fruit instead of wasting their energy trying to survive. I will share the small routine I follow whenever the forecast promises several hot days in a row, and I will also tell you about one old trick that almost nobody around me uses anymore, even though it helps protect the roots better than many products sold in garden centers. The best part is that you can start using these ideas today with things you probably already have at home. Before we get into that first simple step, there is one mistake that almost every gardener makes without even realizing it, and if you keep doing it, your peppers will continue losing flowers no matter how much water you give them. The first thing I had to learn was that sweet peppers do not suffer from heat the way most people think they do. The sun itself is not always the biggest enemy. The real trouble begins when the roots become stressed because the soil keeps changing from soaking wet to dry over and over again. I see this happen every summer. Someone walks outside at noon, sees the leaves hanging down, and immediately grabs the hose. The water hits the hot soil, much of it disappears before the roots can really use it, and by evening the plant looks a little better. The next afternoon, the same thing happens again. After several days, the plant is exhausted, even though it has been watered every single day. Years ago, an older neighbor watched me doing exactly that and smiled because he knew what was coming. He told me that peppers do not want panic. They want stability. At first, I did not understand what he meant, but after trying his method, I never went back to my old routine. Instead of chasing the heat every afternoon, I began preparing the plants before the hottest part of the day arrived. I watered deeply in the early morning while the soil was still cool and the roots had enough time to drink before the sun became intense. The difference surprised me much more than I expected. The leaves stayed firmer, the flowers remained on the plants, and the fruits continued growing instead of stopping halfway through the season. Most people make another mistake right here because they believe more water always means healthier peppers. In reality, roots also need air, and when the soil stays constantly soaked, they become weak and slow. That is why some gardens produce healthy peppers during the same heat wave, while others struggle even though they receive more water. Little by little, I realized that my goal was not to keep the surface wet. My goal was to keep the moisture deeper where the roots actually live. That small change saved water, saved time, and gave me stronger plants without buying anything special. But there is another forgotten habit that made an even bigger difference for me during extreme heat, and almost nobody on my street still uses it, even though it costs almost nothing and protects pepper plants when the temperature keeps climbing day after day. Many years ago, an old man who had been growing vegetables longer than I had been alive walked through my garden during one of the hottest summers I could remember. He looked at my pepper plants for only a few seconds and then asked me one simple question. "Where's the cover for your soil?" I pointed at the plants and told him they looked healthy enough. He smiled and picked up a handful of dry earth from between the rows. Before he even opened his hand, the loose soil slipped through his fingers like dust. Then he told me something I still remember every summer. He said the sun should warm the peppers, but it should never cook their roots. That afternoon we gathered dry grass that had already been cut and completely dried. We spread a thick layer around each pepper plant without touching the stems. It looked almost too simple to matter, and honestly, I did not expect much to change. But after only a few days, I noticed something that completely changed the way I garden. The soil under that layer stayed cool even when the air was extremely hot. When I pushed my hand under the dry grass, there was still moisture where the roots needed it. The surface was no longer turning into a hard crust that cracked open every afternoon. I also found myself watering much less often because the moisture stayed in the ground instead of disappearing into the hot air. Most gardeners still skip this step because they think mulch is only for keeping weeds away. That is only part of the story. During a heat wave, it becomes a quiet shield that protects the entire root system from sudden temperature changes. You do not need anything expensive for this. Dry grass, chopped straw, shredded leaves, or other clean natural materials can all work well as long as they are free from weed seeds and disease. I always leave a small space around the base of each stem so air can move freely and the plant stays healthy. That little detail matters because many people pile the mulch directly against the stem and create problems they could easily avoid. Ever since I started using this forgotten method, my peppers have stayed stronger through the hottest weeks of summer, and I spend less time carrying watering cans across the garden. But even with cool soil, there is another mistake that quietly steals a large part of the harvest, and most people never notice it until the flowers begin falling to the ground, one after another. The next lesson came after I noticed something that confused me for a long time. My pepper plants looked healthy. The leaves were green and strong. I was watering them properly and the soil stayed cool under the mulch. Yet every few days I found fresh flowers lying on the ground. At first I thought insects were to blame, or maybe the plants needed more fertilizer, but neither answer solved the problem. Then another experienced gardener explained that during very hot weather, sweet peppers sometimes protect themselves by dropping flowers because they believe the conditions are too difficult to support new fruit. That was the moment I stopped trying to force the plants to grow faster and started helping them stay comfortable instead. One simple habit made a remarkable difference. During the hottest part of the summer, I began giving my peppers a little protection from the strongest afternoon sun. I did not build anything expensive. Sometimes I used a piece of shade cloth stretched above the plants. Other times I used an old white sheet supported on simple stakes high enough for air to move freely underneath. The goal was never to keep the plants in deep shade because peppers still need plenty of sunlight. I only wanted to soften those few hours when the afternoon heat became overwhelming. Most people make the mistake of covering the plants too closely and trapping hot air around them. That creates even more stress. Good airflow is just as important as shade. My older friend always told me that moving air keeps a garden alive during difficult weather, and after many summers I know he was right. Within a short time, I noticed more flowers staying on the plants instead of falling away. Small peppers began forming where I expected empty stems. The harvest became steadier even when the forecast warned of another week of extreme temperatures. Very few gardeners around me take this small step because they think only large farms need shade during heat waves, but a simple homemade cover can save a surprising number of peppers without costing much at all. There is another detail that many people overlook because it seems too ordinary to matter. It has nothing to do with watering or shade, yet it often decides whether the fruits stay smooth and healthy or become damaged before they are ready to harvest. Once I understood this old habit, my pepper plants became much more dependable through the hottest weeks of every summer dot. There is one more habit that quietly steals harvests during a heat wave, and many people never connect it with the weather because the damage appears little by little. I am talking about feeding pepper plants at the wrong time. Years ago, I believed that if my peppers looked tired, I should give them more fertilizer and help them grow faster. It sounded reasonable, But I quickly learned that too much feeding during extreme heat often creates even more stress. The plants try to produce fresh, tender growth when all they really want is to survive until the weather becomes kinder. An older gardener explained it to me in the simplest way possible. He said, never ask a tired plant to work harder. First, help it recover, and then let it grow. That advice stayed with me ever since. During very hot periods, I avoid heavy feeding and instead focus on keeping the plants healthy and balanced. If the peppers have already been growing well, they usually have everything they need for a short heat wave. Once the weather cools a little, then I return to my normal feeding schedule. Most people make the mistake right here because they think more fertilizer always means more peppers. In reality, it can lead to plenty of new leaves but fewer healthy fruits when temperatures stay high. Another small habit has helped me just as much. Every few days I walk slowly through the garden early in the morning and simply look at each plant before the heat arrives. I check for curled leaves, damaged fruit, broken branches, or signs that insects have appeared. Those few quiet minutes often save me hours of work later because small problems are much easier to solve than large ones. Very few people do this because everyone wants one big solution instead of several simple habits. My experience has been exactly the opposite. A strong harvest comes from many small decisions repeated throughout the season. None of them are difficult and almost all of them cost nothing. That is one of the things I enjoy most about gardening. The best methods are often the oldest ones. They rely on patience more than money. After using these simple routines year after year, I stopped worrying every time the weather forecast predicted another week of intense heat because I knew my peppers had a much better chance of coming through it. Still, there was one final lesson that brought everything together and made the biggest difference in the size and number of peppers I harvested by the end of summer. After following these simple habits for several summers, I finally understood that saving sweet peppers during extreme heat is not about fighting nature. It is about working with it. I remember one summer when nearly everyone around me was saying the season was already lost. The temperatures stayed high for days, the ground became hard, and many gardens stopped producing. I expected my peppers to struggle too, but something different happened. They slowed down a little during the hottest afternoons, yet they kept their leaves, most of their flowers stayed in place, and new fruits continued appearing while many nearby plants had almost given up. That was the moment I realized these old methods were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. They were not creating miracles. They were simply reducing stress enough for the plants to keep moving forward. That is something many gardeners overlook because they expect instant results. Gardening has taught me that steady progress is far more valuable than quick fixes. Every time I walked through the garden early in the morning, I saw another pepper beginning to grow where I thought a flower might have fallen. Week after week, the harvest basket became heavier without any expensive products or complicated techniques. The money I saved by using simple materials from around my yard was just another welcome bonus. Dry grass became mulch instead of waste. An old piece of fabric became shade during the hottest afternoons. Water was used more carefully instead of being poured onto hot soil again and again. These small choices added up until the entire garden became easier to manage. Most people are looking for one secret ingredient that changes everything. But in my experience, the real secret is combining several easy habits that support each other. Healthy roots hold moisture longer. Cool soil keeps the plant calmer. Gentle afternoon shade protects the flowers. Careful watering helps the roots stay active. Regular observation catches small problems before they become large ones. Together, these simple actions allow sweet peppers to keep producing even when summer becomes difficult. There's still one final thought I always share with anyone who asks why my peppers continue giving me such dependable harvests year after year. It is probably the simplest lesson of all, yet it is the one that completely changed the way I look at every growing season, and it is the lesson I hope you will remember long after this video ends. When I look back at all the summers I have spent growing sweet peppers, I realize the biggest lesson had very little to do with peppers themselves. It taught me to stop rushing and start paying attention. Every season is a little different. Some years bring heavy rain, and others bring weeks of dry heat that seem like they will never end. I cannot change the weather, and neither can you, but we can change how prepared our gardens are before those difficult days arrive. That is where the real difference begins. If you remember only a few things from everything I have shared today, then remember these. Water deeply before the heat arrives instead of chasing it later. Keep the roots cool with a simple layer of natural mulch. Give the plants light protection from the strongest afternoon sun without blocking fresh air. Avoid pushing tired plants with heavy feeding during extreme temperatures. Walk through your garden often because the plants will usually tell you what they need long before serious damage appears. None of these methods require expensive equipment, and none of them depend on special products from a store. They are simple habits that have been passed from one gardener to another for many years because they continue to work. Every time I fill a basket with firm sweet peppers after a difficult summer, I quietly remember the older gardeners who shared these ideas with me. Their advice saved me money, saved me time, and gave me harvests that I once believed were impossible during extreme heat. My hope is that these same methods help you enjoy your own garden with less worry and more confidence. There is nothing quite like walking outside on a warm morning and seeing healthy pepper plants covered with growing fruit when you know many people believed the heat would destroy the harvest. That feeling never gets old. Thank you for spending this time with me and allowing me to share what experience has taught me over the years. If these ideas help your peppers this summer, I would be happy to hear about your results because every successful garden encourages someone else to keep growing. And next time I want to show you another forgotten method that helps pepper plants produce larger, sweeter fruits without spending extra money because that simple old trick deserves a story of its own.